Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. Today, folks, what we're going to talk a little bit about is why every system breaks the same way. I know it's kind of a harsh thing to think about, right? Systems breaking. And there's some, realities to why they break the same way. There is a pattern, if you will, okay? And we're going to get into some of what those patterns are. And we don't have to just look at, you know, fragmented groups. We can look at empires, countries, communities, any group really, marriages, relationships, whatever it might be. Every system breaks the same way. And so as we go through this, and once you kind of understand it, you pretty much won't be able to unsee what you've seen or what we've talked about. So let's get started. First, let's talk a little bit about what a system is, okay? A system is something where we have a shared purpose, okay? Where we are in cooperation, where there's also trust, okay? And then a system also has to be regenerative of itself. It has to regenerate, right? It has to invest in itself, right? So it's super important. But let's get into some of the 5 different areas, I guess you could say the breakdown of the 5 different stages and steps, if you will, that an organization, or I should say that a system breaks down. First, coherence. If you think about a system coming together, you can think of Rome or early colonial America, right? What did folks have? Well, they had a lot of this, right? We had the purpose, we had the cooperation, trust, and regenerative. There was a level of sacrifice, right? The rules applied to everyone, not just those, not just the broader populace. The rules applied up and down, right? There was that shared struggle, right? There was common values and we could say morals, right? So that would fall into purpose. There was cooperation in that effort, right? There was trust, and that trust was largely built on the fact that of these other 2 things, right? And then, of course, to do that, there was a service orientation to it. Leaders were as serving as, the broader populace in those situations as well, right? And so with that, we talk about coherence. Coherence is essentially when these things are coming together, right? They're coming together. We're, when I talked in some previous videos about the forming stage of forming, storming, norming, and performing, and then adjourning, of course. When I've talked about that, really coherence is kind of that forming, right? And as this builds momentum, then expansion. Right? Remember, Rome expanded. One of the struggles they had is they expanded too fast. But expansion, even in the United States, even in the early American history, right? Expansion was just a stage where prosperity was good. Once we got established and achieved independence, prosperity grew. Right? Trust grew. There were a lot of good things that were on the rise, right? That shared vision was strong. Sacrifice was strong, right? For the end goal, the purpose. And it kept regenerating. It was reinvesting in itself, right? People were reinvesting in one another. Leaders also reinvesting, right? And then the economies, right, are indicative of this reinvestment, literally, if we're talking about monetary. But it's not just about the monetary. It's really full scope, folks. It's not just monetary. We're talking about the emotional, right? There was physical sacrifice, emotional sacrifice. I mean, it was a full service endeavor at any time in history when countries and empires and so on have come together to go through this as a group, right? So come together, have the common theme of building a system, right? And then, may not say it that way, right? That sounds sterile to say system, but essentially a country is a system, right? An empire is a system. Then the expansion we just talked about. And then what happens is then the challenge, and remember, we're talking about where every system breaks. And this is obviously on the rise. So if we were looking at this, you'd see it, 1 would be here, 2 would be here, and then 3 is going to start to dip on us, right? Number 3 is going to dip on us. Why is that? Because extraction starts to happen. When extraction happens, it's essentially where people value comfort over that shared purpose and sacrifice now. They want to take more than they're giving, right? Now, remember, this could be, because any system, it could be an empire, it could be an organization, it could be community, it could be relationships, marriages, you name it, anything where there's connection, really. But the extraction is when folks start to be more takers, right? They're taking, they're not reinvesting, and then that begins to pick up momentum. From an organizational standpoint, this is also a place where you start to see, say, the ownership start extracting heavy profits without reinvesting in tools and resources and all of that, right? So they're not reinvesting the time, attention, and resources back into the organization for the broader team, right? That's an organizational example. It could be, but this could also be, say, emotional and any connections, right? Because it's also an emotional contract, right? Social contract now is becoming lopsided, right? And then what happens is we start to fall even further, right? So we were on the rise, now we're 4 is down here. Fragmentation happens because now not only are folks not, or I should say some are taking, right? Now you have, in fragmentation, you have full on everybody's, it's all about me getting mine, right? Then you start to see factional situations happen where small groups, right, start to break into small groups. And those small groups kind of have their priorities, right? Things that they want. They're not really playing ball with the rest of the team. Now you can see this in an organization. You can see this as departments not getting along, and the broader team not getting along. And you also start to see here where that us versus them, right? And where that translates over into as well is the us versus them. You see this between, say, management and the broader team, right? And that could be also the ownership and the broader team, right? That us versus them could be in politics. That could be in faith, in people's beliefs, right? God forbid, it's all the isms too, right? Anything where people are different, where we're singling people out, right? Racism and all the isms, ageism, all the way down the line, right? With all of the things, anything to divide. So fragmentation is where that division really starts to pick up steam, right? And then as it starts to pull apart more and more, then what do you think the final thing is? Pretty obvious, right? Collapse. But the thing about collapse you also have to understand is isn't to say that it's the end. It may be the end of this particular genre, this particular iteration of the system, right? This collapse could also be symbolic of a rebirth, right? Because what happens when you end a chapter? You start a new chapter, right? So while this isn't great, this whole, last phase, the last few steps of this aren't great. The opportunity lies in the collapse, okay? Sadly, you see this in the economic world, right? Finances and everything, where people are gaming collapses, the rise and fall of organization with stocks and all the rest of that stuff. You see people gaming this whole, right, theory of operation, if you will, in those arenas. making money, right? Some people losing money, other people making money, and and that's just a game that is being played like a game, right? But we're talking about cultural aspects. It doesn't matter if we're talking about empires, countries, organizations, families, right? Remember, this is also families, actual families, not just married couples and that sort of thing, but it could also be well-established families go through this as well, right? Your friend groups, your local community, your civic organizations, your churches, right? The rise and fall of churches, they open, they pick up steam, they go through their whole thing, and then fragmentation all the way through to collapse, right? Which could also be then the rebirth. It could turn into something else. And you see this when businesses and organizations say fold, right? Or sell off. They get to a place where they know they can't handle it. Somebody comes in, invests because they see opportunity in that, right? They see an opportunity to build it back up, right? I've been a part of those scenarios, and that's actually where my strength lies, is coming in when you're in this phase right here. When you guys are in this phase, catching you before you get to this, before you get to collapse, and turning around your organization so you don't have to sell it off and do all those things. You don't want to do that stuff. You want to be able to, you could call it an intervention, but it's really not called that. But I guess you could say a layman's term technically could kind of be called an intervention. And you come in and we get everybody realigned, and we get, reblued and repurposed and back on track and focused back on the customer, and so forth. So that's essentially what I do, is help you out there. And then, of course, help you pick up steam if you're trying to expand and grow as well. But anyway, so when this collapse happens, it's an opportunity. It should be seen as an opportunity. Now, my theory is, and I find that the Fibonacci sequence, the golden mean, essentially, I see the threshold of where you get to collapse. My number, and this is just me, is 39%. It's the inverse of the Fibonacci, the golden ratio. Okay. When you get to 39%, the effectiveness, then collapse hits. So you want to catch yourself and you got to remember, it's not like, oh, hit 39, we need to do something about it. No, you really need to be doing something about it. This is why I talk about in some previous videos. Right now, when you look across the U.S., what's sneaky kind of a deal going on with $5.5 trillion in waste, kind of laying on the ground because of ineffectiveness of organizations all across the United States, for example, that when I've dug into the actual performance, that not much better than 35% is happening right now, generally speaking. But it's being hidden by the fact that available time isn't being reported as part of the effectiveness tools or efficiency statistics to the census. And some other, you can say, tricks, mathematical tricks that are going on that are skewing it to make it look like we're in the near 70% effectiveness range, and we're really not. Now, there are exceptions that are performing well, and there are also the ones who are, a big slew that are performing very poorly, right? So I'm not saying everybody is 35, 40%, but many, 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 many are in the many thousands, okay? And when I say many thousands, I mean, we're talking, over 100,000. So, you're probably talking about 60% of those, maybe 70 are performing, 40% effectiveness overall when you start factoring everything together. If you were to pull away all the gimmickry, that's where they're sitting. So much of that waste is coming from that differential, right? But 39%, my theory is where you hit collapse. You want to in the converse of that, 61% just showing up to work, doing stuff. If you're not trying to improve, you're not trying to sharpen the sword, the spear, the tip of the spear, if you will, to do better. You're just going in and just doing stuff at work and just kind of going doing the thing, but you're not really building your teams. You're not solving problems. You're not improving upon the organization and what you do for the customer. If you're not actively and consciously in the front of your mind, not in the back of your mind, not generally like, oh yeah, we want to do the best for the customer. Anybody could just say that, right? You're probably hovering around 61%, right? That's the inverse. So catching an organization, that really could see some improvements to prevent them from declining past this threshold, 61%. So if your effectiveness right now, if you're doing your own math and you do your own composite score, and you're coming up with 75%, 80%, then start factoring out all the gimmicks, right? Are you using, consultants often? Are you using hiring firms? Do you have turnover greater than 7 or 8%, right? What's your quality? High cost of poor quality. Go down through all your KPIs. You start, doing multipliers to come up with a composite score and see where you end up. You're probably in the 40 to 55% range, more than likely, once you start factoring that all together. And it's time to make a turnaround. So what do we do now that you've seen this, right? Can't unsee it or unknow it. This is it, folks. This is it. This is an individual. This is a relationship. This is community and civic organizations. These are churches. These are states. These are countries. These are empires. This is all of humanity, folks, right here. And so what we have to recognize now is, what do we do to get back on top of this? Well, we reverse course, right? We have to build back up. We've got to get back to basics, right? We have to redefine our purpose, right? If you don't know what your purpose is, say in an organization, then how are you going to know, is it to build the best product XYZ, blah, 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 for the customer, right? Or service, right? That's a little easier. But what's your purpose, in your relationships? Those are a little less easy to define because there's so many elements to that, right? But you can map that out. It's not difficult to do if you sat down and really thought about it. You could come up. And then you have to agree to cooperate, right? If you don't have cooperation, then you also then can't build trust, right? Because you can't trust somebody who won't cooperate with you, right? And if you're not aligned, if you're not on the same page, right? And then, of course, as we build that, it also has to be regenerative, right? That was one of the core things that I talked about in the very beginning of this video, and I won't go too much longer. I want to kind of keep it simple, but it needs to be regenerative. Do you think this is that they're regenerative here? No, they've stopped investing. They've stopped developing their teams, developing relationships, developing and all that sort of thing. They're using distractions and tricks and gimmicks and all kinds of things, but they're not. Because remember, folks, you can say, hey, we want to become a leaner operation, but it goes deeper than just a leaner operation. We're talking about our emotional, behavioral, the whole person concept goes into this, because an organization is essentially regarded as a person, right? And that person, right, also, just like any one of us, goes through this phase when there's collapse, it starts to become imminent, is ahead if we're not careful, right? So you have to identify this and then reverse that trend. So you have to then reinvest these efforts. And it really has to be, this can be, it can be built right into the introduction to your operations plan. This can be part of your team training, right? And again, you could try to be lean, and I could give you tools all day long, but you won't be able to. And this is, somebody asked me, what's my secret sauce? This is about people. Let me write it in red. I don't know if you can see it. My lighting's a little weak, I know, but this, I'm going to put it right here. People. This is about people, folks. This is all about people. Okay? You know, if you want to think of it this way, this is machines, processes, equipment, or well, machines, equipment, but equipment, resources, all of that stuff, right? Material things, things that you can touch typically, right? This part right here, where it becomes the extraction happens, you know, people are the ones who are extracting. I want to get mine, right? And or everybody for themselves. You can kind of think of it this way: extraction, where say the organization's trying to pull tons of profit off, but they're not reinvesting, you know, in the team and that sort of thing. You know, it could be by neglect, but it could also be manipulation and nefarious things as well. But when that starts to happen, but don't get it twisted either. This isn't just about ownership and management. This could also be about the broader team. The broader team, if they're not coming in and cooperating, right? They aren't on board with the purpose, and they aren't cooperation, and then their actions and activities is born from that, right? And then also builds trust between the entire team, right? And then that in turn creates a regenerative result, right? You know, it's a repeatability, you know, and when we've talked in other videos about daily management that leaders should be doing at the site level with their team, you know, it's essentially, think of it like when I've used other analogies in the past about growing the garden, right? You've got to regenerate, right? So, you know, it's the whole purpose. Once you've got your harvest, and you got to regenerate back into that, right? Got to get the soil, got to get that fertilizer and all the nutrients back into the soil, do all the appropriate things, right? To then, and seed and all the rest of it, and water and blah, blah, blah. That's the regeneration. Now take that analogy, you reverse that trend, or do that is the way you do this, but when you do it, doing it with your people. Your people are essentially what you're growing, right? You're growing your team. You're growing the relationships. It's not just tools and mechanical and all the things, right? Computers, and those are, you know, necessary, and we need those. They're resources for sure. But it's people, folks. And this is where my secret sauce has been. And it's not that it's really a secret. I like to help people, and it's about service. And if you're going to build an empire, build a country, you're going to build a community, you're going to build an organization, you're going to build a family, you're going to build a relationship, you're going to build your church, if you're going to build anything, people, folks, it's people. And what do you think people are made of, right? It's their heart and their head, right? If you get that figured out, there's their heart and their head. And if you want a little more delving, there's a video. I'm not going to necessarily attach it in here, but there's a video in my list of videos talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Watch that video, because I go over the hierarchy of needs that every individual, right, and group and so forth need. And that plays right into people, folks. All right, folks, I hope you understand that. Kind of keeping it simple, but, you know, digestible today. Remember, we don't want to have systems break down, right? But every system, whether it's two people, you know, or large groups, countries, empires, you name it, can break down if we're not focused in on the right things. If we're not doing the things that a system needs to exist and to grow and to expand and to thrive, right? And we want everyone to thrive the best they can, because when others are thriving, we thrive. It's just the bottom line. It's simple math. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If you want to save a country, bam. Just telling you, folks, the solution isn't complex. The details, yes, become a little more complex, and typically it's because we've muddied it up, made it too complicated. So what do you need to do when something's too complicated and you need to fix it and you need to get this back on track? You have to simplify. Simplification, everywhere you can simplify, you're going to find improvement, and you're going to recover, and you're going to prevent collapse. But if you hit collapse, then you definitely have, it's definitely going to be a rebirth one way or the other. So, and then you get to hopefully start back over and then do it right. All right, folks. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When you do that, not only helping to transform culture, but we're transforming ourselves. And remember, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not willing to transform on the inside. Super important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.